Hello everyone and welcome back to Sketching with Shaw. Today we're learning the basics of shading. Let's get into it. Alright, before we learn the basics of shading, we got to learn a little bit about lighting. Here I got two different examples I want to show off before we get into the shading portion. On our left here, our light source is a lot closer to our cube, so our shadow is going to be a lot shorter. On the right side of the page, our light source is a lot farther away from our cube, so it distorts our shadow, makes it a lot longer. But as you see over here, since the light source is a lot closer, our shadow has a much more defined shape. And then if we look over to the right, since it's farther away, our shadow has a much more of a gradient. It's not such a hard line, which I did leave the line there for the tutorial so you'd see where the shadow is. But if this was a drawing I would do by myself, I would try to take that line out and just try to smooth this gradient out a little bit. Alright, and a few more things I want to point out before we get into it. If you look here, we have the occlusion shadows, which is the darkest portion of the shadows. Usually it's right next to whatever the object you're drawing is. That's the reason not all shadows are fully black. And you're also going to be dealing with reflective light. I'll get into that here in a minute. And if you look at our side that's farthest away from a light source, that's our dark side. And then if you look at the side that's a mid-tonish color, that's catching bouncing light, which is what the reflective light is. It's also called bounce light. That's the reason why it's a little bit lighter on the right sides of the cubes. And if you look on the top, that's where the light's hitting the most, so that would be considered the bright side of the cube. And depending on the surface of the cube, there would also be bright highlights. But since it's a cube, you wouldn't really see that. It's more of a, if you would see it in like a sphere or a cylinder. Alright, now that we know a little bit more about shading and lighting, let's take a look at this picture of Morgan Freeman and break down what we see. If you look here, this is the main highlight at the front of the face. If you look off to the left, this is the main shadow on the face. And if you look at his lower left cheek, you can actually see the reflective light I was talking about bouncing off his shirt and lighting up his face to make it look a little white. And to find the highlights in the picture, you can look toward the nose and the eyes. That's where it's going to be the brightest and most reflective, as well as a little bit on the forehead. And then around the cheek areas and where it wraps around to the left side of the head, that's where you can find most of the midtones. And if you look down to the bottom left of the picture, you'll see his head actually creates a drop shadow onto the shirt. Also, this main part over here on the left is also the occlusion shadow, since it would also be considered the darkest. And a little bit right here underneath the nose. Alright, now that we looked at a few examples on paper and a few examples on a portrait, let's use what we learned to put shadows on a sphere, shall we? Alright, to get it started, let's go ahead and draw us a sphere. Let's say our light source is over here. So our light's going to be coming from here. That would mean our shadow is going to be going this direction. And then about right here is where the occlusion shadow would be, which is about the darkest portion. Break it up and get our light and dark side. This is obviously going to be our light side because it's close to our light source. This is going to be the shadowed side because it's away from the light source. But like I said before, light is going to bounce off the surface and into the ball, leaving us little highlights. And then depending on whatever the surface of the ball is, there'll probably be a highlight about right there. If it's more textury and not as smooth, you might not get a highlight. It might be just a smooth gradient, but something more like metal would show a bright highlight. But wood or other things like that wouldn't show much of a highlight. Now we can go in and start shading. And you can use any old pencil for this too. You don't gotta have any special sort of pencils, nothing like that. It's all about how much you push down or lighten your grip on the pencil. The harder you push, the darker it's gonna be. As long as you don't push down too much and make everything too dark, but you also don't want to go too light and everything be lacking contrast. This bigger portion is our drop shadow, the main shadow that the light source casts. And then this is going to be the occlusion shadow, which is the darkest portion. And then you just want to kind of blend that out a little bit, because the farther the shadow goes out, the more that the bounce light, because the farther the shadow goes out, the more bounce light that's going to be hitting it, or reflective light. So it's going to be lighter out here versus right here where less light's going to be, so it's going to be the darkest. And then, since this is the main shadowy portion, you want to darken this up as well. But you don't want to go all the way to the edge because, like I said, bounce light is going to keep this lighter than this main portion right here. This is the part that's farthest away from our light source. And then you can just take something. I usually just take my finger or a blending stump or something like that. You can also take a tissue and then just sort of blend this out. And the same for down here. Then we can go back and erase this and have our highlight. Hopefully the camera can pick that up. And then, like I said, we also got to deal with our reflective light, which is going to give us a little bit of a highlight right here. And a little bit of a highlight right here. But it's not going to give you a whole lot because, like I said, the main highlight is going to be right here from the actual light source. This is just light that's reflected. Now that we got our example drawn, we see this is the bright side. We have our main light source. This is the highlight. Right here is where the midtones would be. Then we have our bounce light right here and right here as well. We have the drop shadow. Then the darkest portion of the shadow, which is the occlusion shadow, and then the whole dark side of the sphere. And everything we just used to create the sphere is what you would use to create all the shadows on a portrait. I know it's a big leap from just a sphere to a portrait, but these are the fundamentals that are used to make that happen. Alright, well that pretty much sums up today's video. I hope y'all did enjoy. If y'all learned or used anything from today's video, you already know I'd love to see it over on my Instagram. I'll like it, share it to my page. But until next time, like, comment, subscribe, share with a friend, and peace.